today we're diving into a really powerful piece of legislation here in India, the PESA Act. Now, it was designed to do something pretty revolutionary, to give real, genuine self-rule back to the nation's tribal communities. But that's a huge claim, right? And that's the big question we're tackling today. How can a piece of paper, a law passed in a parliament, actually shift the balance of power on the ground, especially for communities that have governed themselves for centuries? Well, let's get into it. You see, to really understand PESA, you have to look at it as more than just a law. It's a promise, a constitutional promise made to India's tribal communities, recognizing their fundamental right to govern their own lives, their own lands, their own futures. So back in 1996, the Panchayats Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, we all just call it PESA, was passed to turn that promise into a reality. The main goal? To take the system of local self-government, what's known as Panchayati Raj, and extend it to the tribal-dominated regions, the fifth schedule areas. But, and this is key, it did so with crucial changes that actually respect and empower their traditional customs and ways of life. Okay, so that's the big idea, but what does this promise actually look like in practice? Let's break down the actual powers and protections that the PESA Act puts on the table. First off, let's just talk about the sheer scale of this thing. We're not talking about a small, localized law. PESA applies to the scheduled areas inside 10 different states across the country. That's huge. And look at this list. These states stretch from the west to the east of India. They cover some of the most ecologically sensitive and resource-rich parts of the nation. So right away, you know this act is designed to have a massive impact on millions and millions of people. Now here's where it gets really interesting. How PESA guarantees political power. The law mandates that at least half, 50%, of the seats in the local councils have to be reserved for members of scheduled tribes. But it goes even further than that. Every single chairperson position at every level must be held by a person from a tribal community. That is a powerful guarantee for leadership from within. The real heart of PESA, the engine room of the whole thing, is the Gram Sabha, or the village assembly. Now, this isn't just some town hall meeting. It's the foundational institution of self-rule. It's made up of all the adult members of a village, and under PESA, it is the supreme decision-making body for that community, period. So what can the Gram Sabha actually do? Well, PESA gives it a whole toolkit of powers. It can regulate things like the sale of alcohol. It gets ownership over minor forest produce, things like bamboo or tenda leaves. Critically, it has the power to stop tribal land from being sold or transferred to non-tribals. And on top of that, it manages local markets, controls predatory money lending, and basically guides all local development plans. And then there's this, which is absolutely crucial. The law is crystal clear that for certain major activities, the Gram Sabha must be consulted. We're talking about any big project that needs to acquire land, the management of local water bodies, and maybe most importantly, any mining leases for minerals in their area. And that word mandatory is everything. It's not optional. Of course, a law written back in 1996 is only as good as its implementation today, right? So, what's being done right now to close that gap between the words written on the page and the actual reality on the ground? And this is great to see because the work is very much ongoing. Just this year, a new digital portal was launched to help with grassroots planning. There's a huge push to translate the PESA manuals into tribal languages like Santhali and Gondi, so people actually know their rights. Dedicated PESA cells are being set up for better oversight, and universities are even getting involved to properly study and support tribal self-rule. These are all real steps to make the act stronger. But, and it's a big but, despite all these efforts, fulfilling the promise of PESA has been an uphill battle. The path from law to reality, well, it's often blocked by some pretty significant hurdles that threaten the very idea of self-rule. And right here, this is one of the biggest legal battlegrounds. The Act uses the word consultation. Now, authorities often interpret that to mean they just have to ask for an opinion, tick a box, and then they can move on. But communities and activists argue that it has to mean consent. That means getting explicit approval and respecting the Gram Sabha's right to say no. It's a huge difference, and that ambiguity gets exploited all the time. If you want to see what this conflict looks like in the real world, the Niyamgiri Hills case in Odisha is a perfect, if heartbreaking, example. The Dongiriya Kanth tribe was fiercely opposed to mining on their sacred mountain, but approvals were initially pushed through anyway, with officials just citing consultation. It actually took the Supreme Court to step in and say no, the Gram Sabha's decision is final. It just shows you how high the stakes are. Another massive problem? Just straight up delay. I mean, look at this timeline for the state of Jharkhand. The PESA Act was passed in 1996. The state is only now getting around to notifying the rules for how to implement it. That's a gap of nearly 30 years. For 3 decades, there was an administrative vacuum where the law's protections were basically just on paper. And the challenges don't stop there. You've got all sorts of state laws on mining, on forests, that directly clash with PESA. You have bureaucrats who sometimes just ignore or override what the Gram Sabha decides. A lot of these village assemblies don't get funds transferred directly to them, which really limits their power. And of course, in areas that are rich in minerals, PESA is often unfairly painted as being anti-development, creating this false choice between tribal rights and economic growth. So with all these deep-seated challenges, you might be wondering, what's the way forward? How can that original promise of PESA ever be truly fulfilled? Well, the good news is the path forward is actually pretty clear. It just requires decisive action. First, you have to fix that legal ambiguity. Amend the laws to make it clear that consultation means prior informed consent. You've got to harmonize those conflicting state laws so they align with PESA, not fight against it. Gram Sabhas need direct access to funds for real autonomy. And finally, we've got to change the narrative. Reframe development so it's led by the community for the community. And that really brings us back full circle, doesn't it? After all this time, PESA is still at a crossroads. With a real focus and a genuine commitment, it absolutely has the potential to redefine what development even means, to make sure it's not just for the people, but truly by the people. The only question that remains is whether that incredible promise will finally, fully become practice. Thanks for joining us.